Tonight, the company at the centre of the Ministry of Defence hack, which Sky News understands was carried out by the Chinese state, is named in Parliament. The Defence Secretary confirms a firm called SSCL is involved and says a review of all its government contracts is now underway. China denies hacking and says the claim is completely fabricated. Also tonight, anger in the Commons over Israel's military offensive in Rafah in Gaza. Labour calls it a profoundly concerning moment. As John Swinney is confirmed as Scotland's First Minister, he says he'll give it all he's got and vows to work with other parties to achieve his goals. And after Sadiq Khan pays tribute to his London mayoral election rival Count Binface, we'll be looking back at Britain's proud tradition of unorthodox candidates. All that and more with Baroness Kate Fall and Tom Hamilton, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. How do you solve a problem like China? Well, as we'll be hearing tonight, the UK government might be delicately skirting around the question of responsibility. But Sky News understands that it was China behind the hacking of a Ministry of Defence payroll system. Hacking, spying, human rights abuses, for many, including one of the guests on the show tonight, Duncan Smith, it's obvious how the UK should respond, designate China as a hostile state and treat them as such. But there are clearly two paths here, because just as tales of hacking were brewing here on Sky News, President Xi of China was enjoying a trip to France to meet President Macron. And it was a full shebang. A state banquet with champagne and chandeliers at the Élysée Palace, and then a quick trip for lunch in the mountains. The Chinese Premier is also meeting the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, before visiting Serbia and Hungary. Some European countries are clearly taking a different approach to China than the US is, where relations really are in the deep freeze. And let's not forget, despite somewhat frostier relations in recent years, China remains the UK's fifth largest trading partner. All that trade is worth more than £90 billion. So days like today are important when Britain's deciding which path to choose. Tonight, we'll discuss. Well, Sky's Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates first broke the story last night, and today the government confirmed the substance of it. But its reluctance to blame China has caused controversy. Here's his report.
With the defence of the nation, but has the government left them exposed?
Slightly.
Personal information hacked in a huge breach. Names, bank details, and in some cases, addresses. Sky News understands the government is blaming the Chinese state.
Mr. Shapps, are you scared of upsetting China?
That question dogging ministers. Sky News exclusively revealed the hack on Monday night and the belief across Whitehall that it was orchestrated by China. But no public blame from the government today. The Defence Secretary in the Commons not naming the culprit.
In recent days, the Ministry of Defence has identified indications that a malign actor gained access to part of the Armed Forces payment network.
And pointing the finger at an outsourced contractor.
The House will wish to note that it is operated by a contractor, and there is evidence of potential failings by them, which may have made it easier for the malign actor to gain entry.
The man he wouldn't name, Chinese President Xi Jinping, today starting a visit in France. Warmly welcomed here, but tensions with NATO allies are growing. Beijing said the hacking accusations were completely fabricated and malicious slanders. Few in Westminster believe that denial.
And it's becoming obvious.
And senior backbenchers want more explicit action from government.
I believe that the Defence Secretary could well have stood at the dispatch box, given what they know, and said it is believed that it is China, not some malign actor. It is believed that this was China that had hacked our systems. I think, honestly, he probably wanted to do that. But I suspect that somewhere else in government, maybe the Foreign Office, maybe the Treasury, has said, oh, no, we don't go doing that. We don't upset China.
The compromised payroll system was run by contractor Shared Services Connected Limited. The company's website celebrates its work with the MoD and its secure financial services. Experts say it's a rich target for a hostile state.
It might, depending on how far you can get into bank account details, allow you to look for potentially vulnerable people. And that's a classic espionage technique where you can put pressure on vulnerable people. The other thing is China, as we know, steals gargantuan volumes of data elsewhere. And if you can put things together, then perhaps you can build that richer picture.
Some in Whitehall are baffled at the decision of ministers to blame China in private but not in public, particularly given China's angry response today, which suggests there's little to be gained from holding back. China seeks to dominate as an economic and technology superpower. Is the British state strong enough to respond? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, Sam is here with us now. Well, Sam, I think it was about 24 hours ago you were breaking the story, naming China on Sky News. A day later, and the government is still very, very cautious about saying it was China.
Well, I suppose, Sophie, it was a little bit lonely at first because the government and pretty much nobody else wanted to point the finger at China for quite a long time. And whilst lots of other media outlets have caught up with Sky News, the government determinedly hasn't. Look, if you saw that report, one of the most interesting things is I talked to Iain Smith, who you'll speak to as well, specifically about did he think Grant Shapps could have named China at the dispatch box. Of course he can. Of course he can. And I have to say, my personal reflection, having had lots of conversations about this with people in and around Whitehall today, is they seem absolutely sure. They have done for the last 36 hours. There seems, when I have these conversations, no doubt in their mind. They're not hedging it to me. They're not saying on balance it might. They're saying it's China. And so the question is, how much more proof do you need to have before you say it out loud? They argue quite a lot. I suppose my question is why, but I think MP's question is why as well.
Yeah, it certainly feels like mumblings, particularly with people like Duan Smith as well. My other question, Sam, is about what was exactly hacked here. You know, because it's not. They say it's the MoD, but it's not quite the MoD, is it? What happened?
So the Ministry of Defence, like quite a lot of other Whitehall departments, outsources to private companies things like payroll, the kind of the bit that pays you. There is a company, and it was named in the Commons today as Shared Services Connected Limited, SSCL. They are the MoD's contractor who do not only payroll, but things like pensions. They look after 230,000 serving military personnel, but 2 million veterans. So I think some of the questions around that will not go away for some time. What about the other bits of that company? What about the other individuals that they look after? What about the other government departments that they work for? And what's interesting about the government's language is they're clearly spoiling for a fight with this company, sort of suggesting they're looking to see whether this company did anything wrong, which is an interesting and confrontational approach. The whole politics of contracting out this kind of stuff does allow the government to become vulnerable to the charge when you're hiving this off to people that have less good security, particularly when it comes to some of the most, sensitive individuals in our public sector. Has that been wise?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I guess hostile actors will be trying to find a soft target, kind of a launch pad almost, that's easier to get into.
Absolutely. It's notable that the SAS, the Special Forces, aren't paid through this system. Is that because they needed something that's more secure for them? And if them, why not everyone else?
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, earlier I spoke to the former leader of the Conservative Party, Duncan Smith, who has himself been sanctioned by China. Thank you very much for being on the programme this evening. The Defence... I'm going to start that again. Thank you very much for being on the programme this evening. The Defence Secretary has just been speaking out about the security breach. What did you make of what Grant Shapps had to say?
Well, I'm concerned, actually, that we aren't able to name the state that's involved, and it's absolutely certainly going to be an actor either on behalf of or the state itself. In this case, I believe it's China. China has the biggest apparatus to do this. The Americans have said it dwarfs everybody else's. And we know already that they've attacked things like the Electoral Commission, MPs. We know they've hacked many, many sites in the course of the last 2 or 3 years. And so the questions really for all of this are, why is China not in the enhanced tier of the foreign registration scheme? And it seems to me to be daft.
I mean, I guess the government might say, look, if they're going to accuse China of, effectively a criminal act, they've got to be absolutely sure. They can't just say it. They have to have all the evidence. Do you have any sympathy for them there?
Well, I have sympathy for the government because I believe the government wanted to say it. And I think the government's a bit conflicted about this. Some parts of the government don't because they don't want to upset China. Other parts know exactly what's going on. So all I say is that, last time they were told by the Americans, nearly 2 years ago, that the Electoral Commission had been hacked and that MPs, many more, by the way, than the security services actually told us, nearly 30 to 40 when they told us only a handful, were actually hacked as well. About a year and a half it took for the government security service to accept that they needed to come to the dispatch box and tell us that that was the case and it was China, when they knew it was China by American security links way back nearly 2 years ago. So we don't want to go through this endlessly where we sort of beat our chest and wonder whether or not we should actually name them. The truth is we know that China is the malign actor they're referring to. I'm sanctioned by China. We've been hacked by the Chinese government. The organization I set up, the Inter-parliamentary Alliance on China, made up of politicians on the left and the right all over the world now, they're all getting hacked as well by the same people. So the reality is we now need to be very clear about the problems we face with China. And the foreign registration scheme, we should put China in the enhanced tier, which means basically they're a threat.
There's two things I want to unpick there. Firstly, you say at the beginning of your answer that some parts of the government don't want to name China because they don't want to upset China. What parts of the government are you talking about?
Well, I don't want to beat around the bush, but I have to say that I think the Foreign Office, generally, by and large, does not like doing this. Let's go back a couple of years to when I was sanctioned. At the time, we had raised the whole issue globally of the Chinese government's genocide, and it's now been demonstrated very clearly as genocide, systematic eradication of an ethnic group. That is the Uyghur. We published that with all the data around the world. And what then happened is that it became very clear, many governments then claimed it was genocide. The UK government wasn't very keen to do that. But when America sanctioned, I think, 12 key officials in that genocide, all the way up to people very close to President Xi, the UK government finally sanctioned 3 very low-level officials and an entity, not the main entity that was involved in it. So it's been like that with Hong Kong. It's like that all the time. So my question really is, they are a systemic threat. The Prime Minister, to be fair to him, was very clear about that a year and a half ago. But the integrated review fails to make that clear and calls them some kind of epoch-defining challenge. They're not an epoch-defining challenge, they're a systemic threat. They're aligned with North Korea, Russia, and Iran. They work all together, and their purpose in life, and China, President Xi has said this clearly, is to end democracy as a form of government and go back to the type of government that he prefers, which is autocratic rulers.
You talk about the Foreign Office and the attitude towards China, and I know that you're talking a bit more historically than this, but of course the current Foreign Secretary is the man who hailed a golden era of UK-China relationships when he was Prime Minister. Do you think that perhaps David Cameron is partly responsible for the attitudes in the Foreign Office towards China?
Well, he's come to this quite late in the day in terms of the Foreign Office over the last 3 to 4 years. So to be fair to him, he's actually tightened up some of their stuff. He was the first one to definitely claim that we had been sanctioned, and also to call out their activities against Jimmy Lai, the terrible prosecution of Jimmy Lai on trumped-up charges, and also the naming of British citizens in that trial quite falsely. So to be fair, he has started doing some of that stuff. But I do say instinctively, within the bowels of this department, there is a resistance to want to call out what China really is, and it is a malign actor. And in the foreign influence registration scheme, there is the capacity to basically place them in the enhanced tier, which means they are a threat. And I would simply recommend that the government does that pretty quickly.
While the story about this hacking was breaking on Sky News, President Xi of China was in France having a state banquet with President Macron. I think they had a little trip up the mountains to have lunch in the Pyrenees as well. Do you think that the French president is making a mistake by welcoming the Chinese premier like this?
Well, do you know, I've got used to watching President Macron and always puzzling as to what he's doing and why. Was very slow off the mark with regards to Russia's invasion, threatened invasion, then invasion of Ukraine. It's up to him what he wants to do. But my simple fact of life is, China is one of those kind of countries and one of those regimes that recognize when you show strength to them and they don't want to take it further. When you show weakness to them, when you are more worried about what they might do than what is happening already to you, that's when they take advantage of you. And that's the nature of totalitarian regimes. So we need to face up to China squarely and say, you are behind all of this. You must stop this, or we will counter it ourselves. You must understand that we cannot tolerate this hacking of our sites. Now, if you said that to them clearly and publicly, they would get into a row, they would scream and shout, but at the end of it all, they'd recognize we mean business. And the Americans do that the whole time. So we need to join forces across the whole of NATO and the West and defend our values, because that's what their target is, our values.
Just one more question, if I may, off the back of the local elections and mayoral elections we saw. I don't think you'll mind me saying that you're a bit of a party grandee, if you know what I mean. I'm never really sure exactly what that phrase means, but you're someone who you've known opposition, you've been in Westminster for a long time, and we've all heard the kind of number 10 line, if you like, over the bank holiday weekend about the results. What do you make of the results?
Well, they were bad results. Let's not beat around the bush. For a Conservative Party to have suffered this number of losses is not great. It's bad. And a lot of good councillors have lost their jobs, and mayors too, not being able to get it, particularly Andy Street, I felt very sorry for, as he did an excellent job. So there's no beating around the bush. We have a number of months left before we go to the polls. It is very simple. What the message does come out during those elections is there isn't a great desire to have Labour across the board. They have their, it's not the same as Blair in '96, they're not the same mood on the street. But that's notwithstanding, we have to do a number of things to demonstrate that the everyday lives of British citizens is improving. Things that may seem small, like doctors' appointments, GPs' appointments, dentistry. These things are important to the public because they're their onesie-twosie, they're things that they see on a daily basis. Shoplifting in our streets going unprosecuted. This is, terrible for people who are out shopping to feel scared and worried about it. These sort of criminals. And these are the things we do. And then we need to sort out, the asylum system. The problem is, if we have false asylum seekers here, we need to get these flights off to Rwanda in double quick time. We've seen that it's beginning to have a deterrent effect, but you've got to do it, and do it again and again and again, A, to make the deterrent work, and B, to persuade the public that you mean business. These things are all about getting stuff done. There's much more besides us getting the burden of taxation off them, rewarding them now for having gone through a difficult period, freeing up their lives, helping the market grow, not over-tightening the economy. All these things have to be achieved in the next few months, and the public, for them to license us to be able to say, well, maybe this lot really mean business, and any plan they have for the future will work. The plan alone doesn't work unless people see us in action doing it now.
So a nice short to-do list there for the Prime Minister that you've come up with. Iain, Duncan Smith, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you on the Politics Hub.
Pleasure.
Well, reaction to the MoD hack is likely to be in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant and Conservative candidate in the upcoming general election, Alex Dean. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Deputy Chief of Staff for David Cameron, Baroness Kate Fall, and the former Labour advisor, Tom Hamilton. Great to have you both on the programme. Tom, your first time, I think, as well, so we'll be gentle with you, don't worry. China. Kate, I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, because if you listen to someone like Iain Duncan Smith, you're like, this is so simple, isn't it? This is a country that is hacking our armed forces. Why are we not taking a tougher line on them?
So first of all, obviously, they have not said that it is part of what your interview was about this evening. I mean, look, second of all, it is a serious breach and we must take this sort of thing incredibly seriously. We had one just the other day with the Electoral Commission. Coming into an election year, it does make us even more worried about who is taking our data, disinformation and all that sort of thing. What I would say is the way we look at China at the moment should be, national security concerns, calling out on human rights, raising concerns over sovereignty issues like Hong Kong, like Taiwan, but also we do have interconnected economy. So it's getting the right balance between that, which is so important, I think.
Do you agree with that then?
Well, broadly, I think there are two distinct issues here. One is about attribution, which is where the story's gone and was it China or was it someone else? And I am not qualified to say that it wasn't China.
Yeah.
But I'm also not qualified to say that it was. I'm prepared to accept the assessment that's been made, but the government isn't saying that yet. And the second is the defence and security issue, which is regardless of who it was, somebody has hacked this really quite important information, which should be kept secure. The measures that have been taken to try and keep that information safe have clearly not worked. And that, irrespective of who did it, is a really important issue. And I think the need to tighten up security and make sure that this kind of breach can't happen is as important as what action we take diplomatically. And it may well be that the fact that this is a third-party contractor whose measures clearly haven't worked on this occasion, is, that's something that the government will have to take very seriously when thinking about future contracting. Because, whether it was China or someone else, clearly hostile powers are going to want to do this sort of thing to this kind of information in future.
It feels to me like more broadly, there's a choice. You see President Macron, who I know does have robust conversations with China at times, but he clearly feels that actually that relationship is one that he needs to preserve, that they need to put on the red carpet treatment, if you like, for President Xi. Then you have the States, who it feels like are pulling away from China. They almost see them as their main threat, if you like. Where do you think Britain should go?
So I think that it's more a balance than a choice, and I don't agree that America has done that. They talk a big talk. They do call out China when they're worried about something, and that is completely right. They've upped scrutiny, and we've copied some of that with the investment laws that we have. But equally, they do trade with China.
That's interesting.
So I think here it's be careful, scrutinise, be vigilant, and also be aware of some of the jobs that sort of relationship brings.
So do you think there's a bit of a mismatch then between some of the rhetoric coming from the States and what they're actually doing underneath it?
I think there's a senatorial foreign policy which is more rhetoric, and then there's the government that's trying to get the right balance. And it's very important to get the right balance. I'm not saying it isn't, but those two things are running in parallel.
That's interesting. That is interesting. I mean, do you think that it's a juggle then and a balance for the next government?
It's always a balance for any government, because they need to have a relationship with China that goes beyond just denouncing them while wanting to criticise them on certain occasions. It's a lot easier, frankly, for someone like Duncan Smith to be critical than it is for the Foreign Office or the Prime Minister to be critical. They have to be a lot more careful because they have to deal with these people on a day-to-day basis. And the fact that China may have wanted to hack our information, that sort of goes without saying in international relations, irrespective of whatever else is going on.
Thanks both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Well, British politicians often throw around lofty phrases about Parliament being the seat of democracy. So what do candidates like Count Binface tell us about the state of our politics? Shadow Chancellor Rishi says the Conservatives are gaslighting on the economy and their economic plans are deluded. Fighting words, but do Labour's plans add up? And Stormy Daniels takes the stand in Donald Trump's hush money trial. Could it get any more embarrassing for the former president? Or does it no longer matter?
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back. Now, there are a lot of angles to the Ministry of Defence data breach. The politics, the diplomatic implications, and of course it's really worrying for serving personnel who might have had their data compromised. But is it standard behaviour on Spook Street? To try and get an idea of the cybersecurity landscape, I spoke to the former Deputy Director of Intelligence and Cyber Operations at GCHQ, Brian Lord. Thank you so much for being on the Politics Hub this evening. First of all, how significant is this attack?
I think that there are sort of the significance can be measured in different ways. I think, as the MoD have been sort of clear to point out, no sort of very, very sensitive operational details have been lost, primarily because of some of the layered defences that they have. However, the damage is very different, right? So we now have several 100,000 currently serving or veteran armed service personnel whose details are potentially in the hands of our adversary. So it's highly embarrassing from an MoD point of view, and it's quite worrying and damaging from the point of view of service personnel we should try to be looking and protecting. So I think, whilst however one quite often measures cybersecurity breaches is, does this get to the heart of MoD operational systems? No, it doesn't, but it creates a fair amount of damage reputationally and personnel security-wise in a different way.
The government aren't confirming that they think this is China, but Sky News understands that that is the country behind this attack. Is this the kind of thing that China just does routinely? Do they just hack everything all the time?
Well, I think when one looks at it, most adversaries, or certainly adversaries with a large capability, as the Chinese and indeed others have, the MoD is a prime suspect, and I think one has to sort of bear in mind what was the purpose of this. Quite often, adversaries will attack a part of the network, whether it's part of the supply chain, as it was in this case, to see if they can use that as a landing point for then to try and go deeper into more sensitive parts of the system. So the technique itself is not uncommon. And yes, large adversaries with a lot of capability do tend to do quite large-scale systemic hacking to be able to get as much information as they can from any dimension. So the conclusion that it is a large state is not necessarily an unreasonable one, but I understand the circumspection of the government to formally go firm on whether it's China or not.
Yeah, they've got to be sure. If they accuse China in a public way, they've got to be completely sure.
Indeed.
Why would they be targeting the personal information of armed forces in this way? What can they do with that?
Well, I think this sort of refers back to the point I just made. I think we have to work out what the original purpose of an attack on an MoD system and MoD systems which are contracted out to other suppliers. As I say, quite often, cyber attacks like this, the purpose of them is to try and get into the weakest point, in this case, which was perceived to be part of the supply chain, and use that as a way, once you're inside a system, then try and work your way through from within to get to more and more sensitive information. That invariably will have been the focus of that. In doing so, they will have now captured this information regarding armed forces personnel, and that itself can be used. So I would probably say that is a secondary benefit to the adversary rather than the primary benefit, which was how do you get strategic access into the MoD. Having got that information, once again, it depends what level of information it is. Names, addresses create a security risk inherently, particularly if they are then shared more widely. There is then the sort of bank account details, which then can be subject to fraud for just primarily a disruptive measure. But also what can happen is a consequence of the conversation we're having now. The fact is that it can be used as an information tool to be able to demonstrate to the world as part of a nihilistic debate, which is, look, the British MoD can't look after their security of its personnel, and create more and more tensions and force the UK government to look internally at issues rather than more strategically outward. So there are a number of benefits of that rather than perhaps having the original intent of getting a load of service personnel, which happens to be a byproduct of probably what they were trying to do.
I've noticed that, throughout the interview, you use the word adversary. Some people would prefer the UK to be a bit stronger when it comes to China, to effectively call it a hostile state and to change its policy as a result. What's your view when it comes to China?
I mean, I think that it is well known. It is well known from China's point of view. They have, both at a commercial level, which we have seen, and at a government level, are systemic at trying to get information through technical means. The extent to which we then act that, if you like, as an act of war or an act of aggression, is state-on-state activity. Adversarial states do things against other adversarial states. Are they a hostile state in that extent? Then yes, I suppose they are. I think one of the purposes, I think, of raising the Chinese spectre within the debate of this is we in the UK are facing a lot of geopolitical issues. We have the Russia-Ukraine issue, we have the Gaza issue, which spills over into another hostile state to the UK, Iran. And I think part of this is to try and ensure that the public doesn't lose sight of the Chinese can do hostile and adversarial things to the UK. I think how you define them within that space is probably more an issue for foreign policy than perhaps it is for me to dictate. But yes, the Chinese do have different approaches to this kind of thing and do carry out things which are not in the UK's best interests.
Brian Lord speaking to me there a little bit earlier on in the day, just getting some reports through from the Guardian newspaper that apparently the Garrick Club has voted to accept female members for the first time. Only men are allowed in for the last 193 years, so form an orderly queue, ladies. Garrick, apparently, according to the Guardian, voting to accept female members for the first time. Lots more to come on the show tonight. Stormy Daniels takes a stand in Donald Trump's hush money trial. Could it get any more embarrassing for the former president, or does it no longer matter? And a ceasefire proposal described as a ruse by Israel is seemingly all but dead as Israeli tanks move into control of the Rafah crossing. MPs back here debate how to react to the latest offensive. Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News, the top stories. The government admits a malign actor carried out a hack on the Ministry of Defence, but won't say who. Sky News understands it's China. The Chinese embassy here in the UK says the accusations are completely fabricated. MPs have been condemning the Israeli government for its Rafah offensive in Gaza, with Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy describing it as a profoundly concerning moment. We'll be live in the Commons to hear what was said in just a moment. Donald Trump's been face-to-face in court with the porn star Stormy Daniels as she's been testifying in court in New York for the first time. We'll be going live there for the latest later in the programme. Don't forget, you can stay up to date with all the goings-on in Westminster in our Digital Politics Hub. Just scan the QR code at the bottom of your screen, and on there you can read about some of the other stories we're covering today, including this one. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, who gave a speech in the City of London earlier where she accused the Conservatives of gaslighting the British public. She also claimed the government's economic plan has failed on its own terms. Labour's new MP for Blackpool South has taken his seat in the House of Commons. Chris Webb, there he is, won last week's by-election for the area, which was triggered by the former Conservative MP Scott Benton resigning after being caught up in a lobbying sting by a newspaper. Plus, Sadiq Khan has been saluting one of his electoral rivals as he officially started his third term as Mayor of London earlier. He's been paying tribute to Count Binface, saying he made him work hard for his win. We'll have more from you for you on some of the comedy candidates later on the programme tonight. All that and much more. Just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen to find our Digital Politics Hub. Now, let's go to events in the Middle East, because Israel says it's taken operational control of the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt as it pushes ahead with its latest offensive. Hamas says the move is a dangerous escalation and says a possible ceasefire hangs on the balance. Well, in the Commons today, the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy tabled an urgent question on Gaza. There was disquiet from both sides of the House over Israel's offensive.
And the Minister saying why he thinks an attack on Rafah does not present a clear risk of a serious breach of international humanitarian law, and can he confirm whether he has received any assessment, not legal advice, but any assessment or policy advice from FCDO officials that the threshold has already been met. Now more than ever, we need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages and unimpeded aid to Gaza.
He is an experienced minister, and so he knows that every equivocation, every hesitation, every set of diplomatic niceties has led us to this calamitous moment for the hostages, for the Palestinian people, and for the interests of both peoples in the long term. Now, on the 7th of April, the Foreign Secretary said that support for Israel was not unconditional. So can I ask the question in a different way? Is there any red line? Is there anything the Israeli government could do that would so appall the government that it would feel the need to act? And if so, what is it?
Well, let's speak now to Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's in central lobby for us. John, you were listening in to the debate. What did you make of it?
This was the most heated debate on Gaza since the attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. For nearly an hour and a half, Andrew Mitchell, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, faced tough questioning. Emotions ran high. It got very heated. Tough questions from obviously Labour MPs. Whenever there's either a statement or an urgent question, the Labour benches are packed, the Conservative benches less so. But as we've heard, Kit Malthouse was one of the Tory MPs questioning Israel's actions and demanding tougher stance from the British government. He was joined by Mark Logan, the Bolton North East MP, called for an immediate ceasefire. Geoffrey Clifton Brown from the Tory side said Israel's a friend and ally, doesn't stop us questioning their actions. But there was really tough language, as you might expect, from opposition MPs. There was calls to talk of war crimes, some MPs talking about genocide. That was rejected firmly by Mr Mitchell. The Labour left-winger John McDonnell said to Mr Mitchell, come on, you're better than this. And he talked about massacre and mass murder. There was, however, on the Conservative benches, support for Israel from, for example, long-time supporters Andrew Percy, Theresa Villiers, and Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, was absolutely uncompromising in her backing for Israel. Have a listen to her intervention and also the angry reaction from Labour MPs after she said it.
Israel has a right to defend herself and a duty to protect her people from the brutal terrorist cult of Hamas. Minister, will you confirm that the UK government will maintain steadfast and resolute support for Israel as she finishes the job to eliminate Hamas from Gaza?
Deputy Foreign Secretary.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. Look, it's a heated debate, isn't it? MPs passionate across the House of Commons. Tom, it's becoming a real issue for a lot of Labour MPs, isn't it?
Well, it's clear that Labour's position has moved quite a lot since the atrocities of the 7th of October, and that's partly because of internal pressures, but a lot of it is to do with the way that Israel has behaved. And I think there's a distinction you can draw between a commitment to Israel's right to defend itself and questioning the exact way in which it's doing it. And I think there are completely legitimate questions that Labour MPs and others are asking about whether Israel's course of action is sensible for itself, and also about whether it is overstepping certain moral lines. And, you know, Labour's position has quite clearly evolved over the last few months as a result of that, because there's a real difference between a broad support and specific support for the actions that it's taking.
Do you feel that the Conservative or the government response has evolved as well? I mean, we heard that Kit Malthouse, for example, really toughening up some of the language there.
Look, I feel like we've been a trusted friend to Israel. We've supported them in their hour of need and their right to defend. But we've also asked for them to think sometimes before they've taken a certain action. Rafah has been one of them. I mean, we were waiting with this, and Ramadan came in the way, and then of course the Iranian attack. And now we see, you know, Gaza on the point of famine, people have nowhere to go, a sense of the aid so desperately needed there. And the hostages, don't let us forget, the hostages return to their families. So I feel this is just a very depressing moment, because we sort of thought there was and it was a sort of pause, not a long-term ceasefire yet, but just a pause for some of those things to happen, and then suddenly we saw the attacks come in. So I think people are feeling heated for very obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful, isn't it? You know, it's one of these stories where I find it very difficult to cover, to be completely honest, because it's just the kind of horrors. You know, we saw obviously what happened in October with Israel. Yes. You kind of feel desperately sad, and then obviously the children in Gaza as well. You know, your heart just bleeds. And so you can see why MPs feel so passionate about it. Do you think these debates make any difference?
Well, I mean, they have to happen because on any issue where MPs feel strongly, they have a right to raise the issue and express it, and ask, you know, the government department that is responsible for these areas to respond. The problem is that in the end, it isn't the UK's Foreign Office that is doing anything on either side. I mean, they have some responsibility for delivering humanitarian aid, which they're attempting to do, but fundamentally, the important decisions are not being taken by them, and there's always a level of sort of, I don't want to say displacement activity, because in the end the MPs feel very strongly and they have a right to feel strongly, but the people that they want to criticise are not the people that they're questioning.
Yeah. You obviously know Lord Cameron very well, work with him very closely. Some feel that he's toughened up, I guess, the UK government's position when it comes to Israel since being in the Foreign Office. Do you think that's true?
Well, look, I think, back to what I said, I feel he's acted as a trusted friend to Israel. He 100% supports their their right to defend themselves against Hamas. He went to Israel straight afterwards. He was there and felt their agony, as it were. But he's also said, you know, please think about what you do next. And there is a sense of pressure. We are worried about famine in Gaza. We know that they're all there in a tiny little area and they have nowhere to go. There are children being hurt and killed in this. And he just wants, I mean, I don't know what he wants, but I mean, I would imagine what he wants to do is do the right thing and try and get Israel to think about that move.
There was a bit of a message in some of the seats at the local elections towards Labour where we saw Labour councillors losing support in favour of more pro-Gaza, I guess, candidates is how I describe it. Do you think that the party will come under more pressure to toughen up its stance more against Israel?
Well, I think it clearly will, because there are many Labour members and activists and MPs and people who you would broadly put on the left of politics who may or may not vote for the Labour Party who will do that, who will call for those changes. I don't think that should be the primary concern of the Labour Party. They should be thinking about what what they actually think the right response should be. Partly because that's always what parties should do, and partly because I think the other big lesson from the local elections is that although Labour has lost some support over that, overwhelmingly, that is not enough to cost them an election at this point. So they shouldn't overreact for electoral reasons. They should think about the principle.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Right, let's bring you up to date now, shall we, with the latest on Donald Trump's hush money trial. The former adult actress Stormy Daniels has been giving evidence. The details have been predictably salacious. The former president denies falsifying business records as part of an attempt to pay off Ms Daniels to keep their affairs secret. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews. James, it was a pretty excruciating day for Donald Trump in court. Do you think it'll bother him?
Yes, Sophie, I think it is bothering him, and we get that from his demeanour. He looks upset. He has shaken his head, constantly tapping at the elbow of his attorney as Stormy Daniels gives evidence. He was heard to issue an expletive during one story that Stormy Daniels was recounting relating to their meeting. It was a meeting at Lake Tahoe. The picture was presented when in court, the picture of them meeting in a gift shop at a golf tournament. Donald Trump invited her to his hotel penthouse. When she turned up in that penthouse, she said that he was dressed in silk pajamas. They sat down to dinner. She said that he was a bit overbearing, a bit pompous, arrogant, interrupting her. At one stage, he produced a magazine, and she said somebody should swat you with that. He gave her eyes, she said, that dared her to do just that, and she proceeded to spank him, in her words, on the butt in that hotel room. That's the bit where Donald Trump issued an expletive when she was relating that story. Inside that hotel room in 2006, Stormy Daniels said that that's when they had sex. She went to a bathroom. He, by this point, had changed into a shirt and trousers, but when she emerged from the bathroom, she found him posing, to use her word, on the bed in t-shirt and boxer shorts. He stood up. She said that she wasn't threatened physically or verbally, but he was bigger than her and stood between her and the door. She said that she blacked out, but they ended up having sex. And when they partied, he said to her, "Let's get together again sometime, honey bunch." So that's the kind of detail, the excruciating detail that's been relayed from the witness box over the course of several hours. Sophie, Stormy Daniels is now back in after lunch, talking about the payment at the heart of the matter, the heart of the prosecution, $130,000 that she received to stay quiet, which was falsely accounted for. That's the alleged crime here. But clearly, Donald Trump isn't happy. Indeed, his lawyers, during the lunch break, argued for a mistrial. And Donald Trump posted on his social media site that there should be a mistrial called in this case. The judge listened to the argument, has rejected that, and we've continued on with evidence from Stormy Daniels into the afternoon. She may be there for some time, possibly into a second day of evidence. But yeah, Donald Trump knew this day was coming. She is one of the star witnesses, but certainly one of the most excruciating and difficult for him to listen to.
Okay, excruciating, perhaps the word. James Matthews, thank you very much indeed. James Matthews sitting through all of the details of that trial for us. You're watching Politics Hub. Coming up.
Bin face count bin face for Mayor of London, 24,260.
As the dust settles on last week's local elections, we're going to be asking what electoral candidates like Count Binface tell us about the state of our great British politics.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, more on the data hack at the Ministry of Defence, which could affect more than 250,000 service personnel. Plus, Prince Harry is in London, but he won't be seeing his dad, with a spokesperson saying the King is just too busy. And the young girl who was misdiagnosed 30 times before she was told she had a brain tumour. I'll be talking to her mum. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
You know, gender-neutral toilets are a great way to protect a lot of different people, and you know, I think what we're seeing right now is the government using a distraction technique that targets trans people to distract from a flailing government, and I don't think this policy will do anything to protect anyone. There's no evidence that suggests that mixed bathrooms are inherently more unsafe than sex-segregated ones. And meanwhile, there's a lot of compelling evidence that shows that lots of people are made more unsafe by having only sex-segregated toilets. And I'm thinking about people like trans teenagers, but I'm also thinking about you know, cis people who are gender non-conforming, who don't necessarily pass as the gender that they were assigned at birth. And you know, these are the people who are going to suffer when we start really policing people's sex before they go to the toilet.
It was only in the late 1800s that women could actually go out at length from their own homes, and we had to fight for those spaces. And they were only offered those because of the need for women to spend more money. So it's never been that women get what they ask for. We have to fight for it, and now we have to defend it. Now, this is about women. It's not about how people choose to identify. It's about the needs of women. And women and men, and you know, I'm using the term there to mean male and female, use toilets differently. And the way that men use toilets, unfortunately, means that women aren't able to use those spaces in the same way. We have to sit on wet toilet seats. This is not acceptable. But that, you know, that disregards the actual safety aspect of, you know, the installation of spy cameras, which can be collected later. This happens. You know, this is the world that women live in.
We live in a world that is non-sex segregated. You know, we sit on trains next to each other. We sit in the theater next to each other. We sit on the tube next to each other. I've just been in Germany, and I went to a mixed co-ed sauna where everyone was nude together, and it was completely a non-issue. If you go to a queer bar in East London, toilets are labeled cubicles or urinals. It's a non-issue. And I'm not trying to say that that's like a utopian space, far from it, but it's very easy once it's done. And I would encourage Jean to come and visit a gay bar in East London and just see how it does work, because what she's worrying about are hypotheticals that aren't really bearing out in the evidence and which do end up harming more women.